The asteroid base, Charon 7, floated in the orbit of a dying star like a wound that refused to close. Its composite hull shimmered with artificial gravity fields, its halls filled with voices in dozens of languages, all united under one banner, the Galactic Concord, a fragile peace held by stronger weapons. Here, on this remote military outpost, the newest species to join the Alliance, humans, were still finding their footing. Cadet Elias Mercer stood stiffly in formation, his boots barely making contact with the polished alloy floor. He was 21 years old, barely out of training, and already sick of being treated like a child. Around him, rows of other recruits stood silently, most towering over him. Tharnians with their glassy chitin armor, Hekari with their pulsing biosuits, and Grawl soldiers like the one who paced in front of them now. Unit 47A, nicknamed Verwin, by those too intimidated to ask his real designation. Verwin wasn't a soldier in the traditional sense. He was a Grawl Paragon, a genetically engineered warform built to operate independently across war zones, with over 100 confirmed planetary pacifications to his name. Rumors said he had once single-handedly destroyed a sentient AI colony that spanned 3 moons. Others said he'd asked for that mission because it was interesting. He had not spoken a single word to any human since his arrival 3 days ago. Elias watched him approach, noting the contrast between Verwin's gleaming exosuit, black with veins of glowing indigo, and his own compact human armor, more practical than impressive. Verwin stopped abruptly in front of Elias, the air around him humming faintly with energy. His eyes, if the piercing twin points of light in his helmet could be called that, fixed on a young human cadet. Human, the voice buzzed through a translator module, deep and sharp, like metal grinding against itself. Your stance is incorrect. I'm standing as per Concord protocol, sir, Elias said, voice level. A few heads turned. A Tharnian hissed in amusement behind him. Verwin stepped closer. Protocol does not apply when you are weak. Elias clenched his jaw. Respectfully, strength doesn't come from size or augmentation. There was silence. Even the ambient hum of the station seemed to hush itself. Verwin moved so fast Elias didn't see it. A metal hand, massive and unrelenting, struck his face with enough force to send him sprawling onto the ground. His helmet clattered beside him, cracked. Blood ran from his lip, slow and dark. Elias coughed once and got to his knees, not looking up. No one spoke. The strike was not protocol. It was personal. The commanding officer, a Kalari named Surthali, made no move. His 6 eye stalks blinked once in rotation. Disputes during cross-species training are common, he said. Let this be a lesson. Elias stared at the floor, his hands trembling, not with fear, though there was that, but with humiliation. The slap hadn't hurt so much as the silence afterward, the way everyone turned away, the way the Grawl strike had been accepted as natural, like rain falling. He stood up slowly, blood still on his chin. Request permission to be excused, sir. Surthali waved one appendage. Granted. Dismissed. Elias didn't look at Verwin as he left, but Verwin watched him the entire way out. In the hallway, Elias walked with rigid steps toward the barracks, anger simmering under the surface. He passed a group of human recruits who looked away as he approached. No one said anything. He wiped his face with his sleeve and didn't stop walking. Back in the training yard, Verwin remained perfectly still, staring at the space Elias had vacated. His internal systems logged the incident with precision. Biofeedback scans showed no escalation of aggression. Muscle memory recorded the exact force used. The soldier had learned long ago how to calibrate violence. 5 minutes passed. The Grawl soldier tilted his head slightly, as if hearing a call no one else could. One of the training officers stepped toward him. Unit 47A, the officer said cautiously, "You're needed in Sector 12. Debrief." Verwin moved before the sentence ended. One moment, he was standing in formation. The next, the officer's body was flying backwards into a wall, limp. Screams erupted. Alarms failed to trigger. Verwin's internal emitters pulsed, disrupting the base's electromagnetic systems with surgical precision. Lights flickered. Doors failed. The first few soldiers who reacted were not human. Two Hekari attempted to encase him in a kinetic field. He ripped through it, tore one in half, crushed the other beneath a boot. It happened in silence. No warning, no battle cry. The station's AI tried to intervene. Verwin disabled it with a thought, deploying invasive subroutines he'd stored in his neural net decades ago. The walls themselves betrayed the base, unlocking doors he passed through, locking those behind him. On the command deck, Surthali received fragments of reports, casualty estimates rising by the second, none of them making sense. One soldier? Impossible. He's gone feral. A young communications officer whispered. He slapped a human cadet. 5 minutes later, Thali turned sharply. What did you say? But she couldn't finish. The feed went dark. In the cadet barracks, Elias sat alone, still clutching the cracked helmet. He was trying to understand the point of everything, of proving himself, of belonging to a galaxy that didn't want him. He barely noticed when the lights cut out. Outside, in the distance, something exploded. He looked up. Something had changed. Something had begun. The silence had fell over Karen. 7 was not the kind that accompanied peace, but the kind that came just before annihilation. Deep in the heart of the command center, status lights blinked red. Warning glyphs scrolled in a dozen alien scripts, and no one moved fast enough. It had been 5 minutes since the slap, and now Verwin was gone. Technically, he hadn't gone anywhere. He was still on the base. But he was no longer a soldier. He was something else now, something the Concord had engineered and buried. Thinking obedience could be hard-coded. They'd forgotten that one was not a switch. It was fire. A detachment of Kalari guards intercepted him near the eastern armory. They approached in formation, shields raised, weapons humming. He didn't slow. The first fired a disruptor bolt that hit Verwin's center mass, and stopped, sizzling uselessly against his exosuit's reactor plating. Verwin stepped forward, caught the second by the throat, and drove him into the ceiling. The others fell back, instinct overriding orders. He didn't pursue. Not yet. Verwin didn't make a sound as he moved through the facility. Alarms were useless. He'd shut down the base's internal AI network with a precision-coded virus injected into the mainframe seconds after his initial strike. Lights flickered. Doors malfunctioned. The station itself, a marvel of galactic engineering, had become his accomplice. In the cadet barracks, Elias heard the distant thud of walls collapsing, the scream of stress metal and things too massive moving too quickly. He gripped the edge of his bunk, unsure whether to hide or run. He'd thought he was angry before. Now he was just confused. The slap had felt personal, targeted. But this wasn't punishment. This was execution. Through the comm link embedded in the wall, a distorted message broke through static. All personnel evacuate. Unknown hostile. All personnel evacu. A low-frequency pulse rippled through the base, and the message cut off. Elias felt it in his bones. He stood up. The corridor outside the barracks looked deserted. The lights had gone from sterile white to emergency crimson. Doors hung crooked on their hinges. He crept forward, heart pounding, then froze as a section of the wall ahead exploded inward. A body, unrecognizable in shredded armor, slid across the floor toward him, leaving a trail of blackish blood. Verwin stepped through the smoke. He was covered in it, blood, debris, energy scars. His exosuit hummed with contained violence, not a scratch visible on its surface. He looked at Elias as if seeing him for the first time, or perhaps remembering. Elias did not run. He didn't speak. He stood there, breathing hard, trying to make sense of the chaos that had begun with a single strike. Verwin took a single step closer. The floor beneath him dented. "You endured," he said. Elias shook his head. "What are you doing? These are your allies. You killed Concord soldiers." "No," Verwin replied calmly. "I removed obstacles. There's a difference." Another explosion rocked the station, distant, but deep. Elias flinched. Verwin didn't move. "Because of me?" Elias asked, not quite believing it. "Not because," Verwin said. "Through you." The words meant nothing. Or maybe they meant everything, and Elias just didn't want to understand. Across the station, In the subterranean hangar bays, emergency evac units were being prepped by panicked crew. None of them expected to survive. The Paragon wasn't a myth anymore. It was real, and it was here. Someone tried to fire up a long-range comms buoy, but the signal was immediately corrupted. Every system Verwin touched broke, or obeyed, never both. A Concord lieutenant tried diplomacy. He cornered Verwin near the tactical control center, unarmed, hands raised. His translator glitched mid-sentence, replaced by Verwin's voice overriding it. You gave me a name, then forgot what names mean. I remember. The lieutenant didn't have time to reply. Verwin stepped past him. A moment later, a blast door crushed a man against the wall. Back near the barracks, Elias followed slowly. He didn't know why. Maybe he was still trying to stop it, or maybe he just wanted answers. Verwin made no move to attack him, which only made everything more terrifying. Why did you hit me? Elias asked finally. If this was always going to happen, why start with that? Verwin turned his head slightly. Because you were unbroken, but not tested. That wasn't a test. It was a humiliation. Only if you remain on the ground. Elias didn't reply. They entered the base's observation deck. From here, the shattered surface of the asteroid stretched out beneath a stained glass dome of energy shielding. Ships, human, Kalari Grawl, flickered in orbit, hesitant to intervene. Even they feared what Verwin might do next. A fleet of assault drones activated from the station's upper hangars. Hundreds of them, automated, synchronized, merciless. They swarmed toward the dome. Verwin turned to face the sky. He raised one hand. They stopped mid-flight, every single one. Then they fell, plummeting back to the surface like burning hail. Elias watched in disbelief. Why aren't you killing me? Verwin's voice was steady. Because you were the only one who stood up. You slapped me, and the universe flinched. The silence returned, heavier now. The destruction wasn't done, but it had paused, held in a breath not yet exhaled. I don't understand what you are, Elias said. I am what remains, Verwin answered, when restraint is no longer required. Outside, the Concord fleet began to reposition. Warships shifted into orbit, scanning for an angle, a weakness. But they would find none. Verwin looked at Elias one last time. You are young. Learn from this, or inherit its consequences. Then he stepped backward, into the shadows, into the breach he had torn into the side of the station. His figure disappeared into the vacuum, the energy shield rippling closed behind him. Elias stood alone in the shattered observation deck, surrounded by silence, waiting to see if the galaxy would dare answer back. Verwin did not flee. He vanished with purpose, a shadow slipping between systems too slow to react and minds too limited to grasp the full breadth of what had occurred. Surveillance logs traced him to the station's hull, then lost him among the debris field, as if the vacuum itself had absorbed him. No trail, no comms, no heat signature, just silence. The Concord's response was delayed by fear disguised as protocol. A tribunal convened aboard a neutral vessel orbiting the shattered asteroid, its delegates tense, careful not to speak too boldly. Across all species, across eons of conflict, they had never witnessed a weapon turn itself on them with such precision. Not a rampage, not chaos, just surgical fury. Calculated, intentional. Only one species had been spared. Elias sat alone in a debrief chamber 2 days later, his uniform scorched and stained, the bruise on his cheek still deepening. Across from him, a panel of officers regarded him like a glitch in an otherwise explainable system. They asked questions, measured, cautious. He answered what he could. The truth was, he didn't know why he was alive. He didn't know why the Grawl had chosen him. He only knew that he felt changed. One of the officers, a human colonel with silver at his temples, leaned forward. He said, "You endured," the colonel prompted. "Yes." "Endured what?" Elias hesitated. "His judgment, I think." The colonel exchanged glances with his counterparts, a Tharnian diplomat, a Hekari command priest, and a Grawl officer named Triumvar. The Grawl wore ceremonial armor, matte and unadorned, his face expressionless, his presence oppressive. "He called you unbroken," the colonel continued. Do you know what that means to the Paragons? Elias shook his head. No. Triumvar spoke then, voice flat and low. It means he saw potential. In what? Elias asked, not with arrogance, but genuine bewilderment. In fire. The tribunal dismissed him soon after. He left with more questions than answers. Later, when the Human Command retrieved restricted files for internal review, a clearer picture began to emerge. Veruin Designation Unit 47A had not been merely a soldier. He had been a relic from a war the Concord refused to name. Born in the final century of the Graal-Hekari conflicts, Veruin had been designed as an apex responder, one deployed only after diplomacy, attrition, and annihilation had failed. Records showed he'd been used precisely 3 times. Each time, entire populations vanished, not exterminated, erased, as if scrubbed from the memory of the stars. The last time he'd been activated, he disobeyed a termination order. Instead of eliminating a defeated foe, he had transmitted a single message. Asterisk, if you force me to end what could have grown, you deserve neither peace nor victory. Asterisk, after that, he was sealed away under biometric containment protocols, encoded directly into the genetic locks of the Graal High Council. No formal deactivation, just silence. Until now, Elias wasn't told any of this directly. He learned it piece by piece, whispered by soldiers who had seen the wreckage, engineers who tried to trace Veruin's escape, and analysts who trembled when reviewing the telemetry of the fallen drones. One by one, a picture formed, not of madness, but of intention. He began to understand. Veruin had not struck because he was angry. He had struck because no one else had. He had witnessed an institution that prized unity but tolerated humiliation, that bred warriors but refused to defend the weakest. He had seen a cadet, a human, stand up to him with nothing but resolve, and then watched the command structure abandon that same cadet in favor of hierarchy. And then he had made a choice. There were no more attacks, no follow-up strikes, no declarations. It was not a war. It was a warning. The Concord tried to keep it quiet. They spun it as an isolated breakdown, a freak systems error in an outdated warform. But those who had been on Karen 7 knew better. They had seen the look in Veruin's eyes. They had felt what it meant to be judged by something built for extinction. Elias was eventually relocated to a secure Earth facility. There, among high walls and tighter secrets, he trained harder, studied longer. But he wasn't just preparing to fight anymore. He was trying to understand what it meant to carry a moment like that, to be the match that hadn't sparked a war, but revealed one already burning underneath. Then one night he found it, a data crystal embedded in the fractured edge of his helmet. It wasn't there before, not when he'd examined it after the attack. The encryption was Graal, ancient, nearly impossible to decode. But someone, somewhere, wanted him to. The message was brief. Asterisk, what you endured, others will not. Make sure they don't have to. This galaxy will learn again to respect spirit, or I will return to teach it. Asterisk, no signature, no trace, just a timestamp, accurate to the second after Veruin disappeared into the void. Elias closed the file and looked out over the Earth night sky, stars blinking like distant witnesses. He still didn't know what Veruin had seen in him. He only knew that he would never forget it, and neither, he suspected, would the Concord. Somewhere in deep space, a ghost moved through the void, not lost, not broken, but waiting. The training fields on Earth were quiet at dawn. Mist clung low to the grass, curling around steel structures like ghostly fingers. Elias stood at the center of the sparring ring, visor down, sweat dampening the lining of his collar. Across from him, a drone unit charged, simulating Graal combat tactics, fast, unrelenting, merciless. He deflected the blow with a pivot and counterstrike, every movement refined, measured. He didn't think about winning anymore. He thought about surviving with purpose. The years since Karen 7 had not erased the memory. If anything, time had crystallized it. Veruin had disappeared, but his shadow stretched long across the galaxy. That one act of insurrection, no, of precision, had sent waves through every political and military structure. The Concord had doubled its oversight measures, rewritten the protocols for artificial intelligence, and discreetly dissolved the Paragon initiative altogether. But beneath all that, a deeper fear took root, not of war, of exposure, of judgment. And in that fear, Elias had become something unintended. He was no longer just a cadet who had been slapped. He had become a symbol. To humans, he was the one who had stared down an apex war form and lived. To others, he was a variable no one had accounted for. The Concord's quiet efforts to obscure the incident only amplified the myth. Rumors spread that Verwin had selected him, that Elias carried a fragment of Grawl code, that he would become the next Paragon. None of it was true, and yet none of it was entirely false. He finished the training session and removed his helmet, breathing hard. Around him, other recruits trained under the rising sun, casting long shadows across the compound. A new generation, stronger, faster, more informed. But none had stood under the gaze of the weapon that had almost undone them all. He walked to the comm tower after drills, as he always did. No messages waited. They never did. And yet, he checked, not because he expected Verwin to reach out, but because he knew one day he might, not in the form of a broadcast or a warship, but in something subtler, a pattern, a silence, a missing piece. His superiors kept close tabs on him now. Every mission he took was monitored, every deployment matched with redundant units, just in case. They were not protecting him. They were watching him. He didn't mind. Let them watch. Let them wonder if he'd been changed. He had. He walked the base perimeter that evening, the breeze carrying the distant hum of orbital traffic overhead. Far above, satellites blinked and shifted, eyes in the dark. The stars beyond were harder to read, swallowed by distance and history. Somewhere out there, Verwin moved to the edges of map space. Maybe not even moving. Maybe just waiting. Elias remembered the words. Asterisk. Make sure they don't have to. Asterisk. He had replayed that sentence endlessly in his mind. It wasn't a command. It was a burden, a passing of responsibility. Verwin had been designed to judge. But Elias had been chosen to warn. And the warning was simple. The Concord would not survive another lapse. Already, the fractures were showing. Outposts reported increased Grawl silence. Hekari priest-ships delayed their ritual delegations. Even the Kalari, the most diplomatic of the elder species, had begun recalling their ambassadors to homeworlds. Officially, things remained peaceful. Unofficially, the galaxy was holding its breath. One night, it broke. A Concord cruiser orbiting the planet Irex. 9 vanished from all telemetry. No distress call. No debris. No survivors. Just gone. The fleet command ran simulations, investigated every known threat vector. Nothing matched. But Elias knew. He stood in the command chamber of the Earth Defense Council 3 days later, facing a round table of high command. Their faces were grim. None had invited him, but none stopped him from entering. Whatever did this, one of the admirals said, it left no trace. Elias said nothing. The Grawl representative, a silent monolith at the edge of the room, finally spoke. The galaxy forgets quickly. He has not. Everyone understood who he was. And still, they could not name him aloud. Later, Elias sat alone in his quarters, lights dimmed. He activated the old data crystal again, the one Verwin had embedded in his shattered helmet years ago. It still held only that one message. But tonight, a new symbol flickered beneath the text. Not words. A location. Uncharted. Deep space. Far from Concord trade lanes. Buried in noise. He didn't alert anyone. He didn't request backup. He simply packed his gear, submitted his leave under the guise of personal reassessment, and left Earth the next morning in a rented civilian scout ship. The stars welcomed him back like familiar strangers. The coordinates led him to a system with no name. A dead star. A single moon orbiting a fractured gas giant. On the surface of that moon stood one thing. A tower. Metallic. Tall. Not of any Concord design. He landed at its base, heart steady. Inside, he found a chair. A data console. Nothing else. He sat, and the tower spoke. Not in words. In memory, in sensation, in vision, a record of destruction not done, of warnings not yet given, of species on the brink, of justice unclaimed. It was not a weapon. It was a mirror, and in that mirror he saw himself, not as he was, but as he could become. He understood. This was never about vengeance. It was always about readiness. When Elias left the tower, he wasn't carrying plans or blueprints or orders. He carried something heavier, a choice. And across the galaxy, as ancient powers stirred and new ones rose, a name returned to whispered lips and hidden files. Verwin, and beside it now another, Elias.